Well, I'm Sylvia Judd, one of the members of the board and board president of Rural Roots, which is this is our Rural Roots Sustainable Ag Speaker Series, which, except for in the summer when everybody's out farming and gardening, we meet monthly to hear from different members of our community who have various kinds of expertise in all things that might pertain to small acreage and sustainable regenerative growing and gardening and farming. And tonight we have Mario Luppino, who's graduate student at WSU in Pullman, and now moving over to being a graduate student with Dr. Robert Orpid in Wenatchee in entomology. He's been keeping bees since he was, you can fix anything I say wrong, Mario, when it's your turn. He's been keeping bees since he was 16. He's raised honeybees, and he also has experience in raising mason bees in the past, and he's president of the WSU Entomology Graduate Student Club. I know that's not the exact order of its name, but and he's giving us a half or a third or something of his a version of his usual wander talk on keeping mason bees, and we are very glad to have him. He's recently been researching all the different kinds of mites that live on the bumblebees in our native bumblebees in our region. And I don't know about what research he's going to be doing in Wenatchee, but I expect it involves bees and apple trees. Over to you, Mario.
Cool. Thank you for that introduction. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and let me know if it comes through.
Oh, it looks great. That's a beautiful picture.
Cool, thank you. Let's see if this will start. Okay, can you guys see just the presentation slide, not any notes or anything like that?
Yep.
Cool, okay.
That's what I see.
Okay, so yes, as Sylvia mentioned, I'm a PhD student of entomology, so I will just talk a little bit about myself first. I got my associate's degree from Bellevue College on the west side of Washington when I was 19. And then I took a break from school because I thought I had learned all there was to learn and I didn't want to do school anymore. And so I didn't get my bachelor's in environmental and ecosystem sciences at WSU until 2019, almost 6 years later. So I was keeping honeybees. I kept about 5 colonies of honeybees from the age of 16 to 23 until I returned to school. And I also minored in sustainable development. So my education is both practical and by the book. So I'm currently a 4th-year PhD student of entomology at WSU. So I didn't leave. I got my bachelor's and moved right on to a PhD at the same university. And I currently focus in ecotoxicology and parasitology in wild bees. And that's just a fancy way of saying that I'm interested in the different types of pesticides that bees are exposed to, and if those pesticides have any interaction with the various parasites that affect wild bees. And I specifically focus on bumblebees, so I'll talk a little bit about them, but not too much. So before we get started on mason bees in particular, I want to talk about why bees are important overall. And they're important because they're pollinators. They pollinate upwards of 70% of the food that we depend on. So this is a tricky statistic because it sounds like they do a lot of work, and they do, but the majority of the food that we eat, the majority of calories that we eat, don't come from foods that are pollinated. They come from corn, which is wind pollinated, and they come from wheat, which is also wind pollinated. So they pollinate the important things, the fruits and the vegetables that we do depend on, but 70% sounds a little bit more, it sounds like they do more than they do. So the majority of non-food plants that keep our planet healthy are also pollinated by bees. So they do, I think it's something like 90% of the angiosperms that are important for global ecosystem function, the things that keep our waterways clean and the things that keep our airways clean, they also pollinate those plants and help them proliferate. So they're important. Bees are important because the foods that we eat may not be as available to us as bees decline in the future. So you may hear that certain foods are declining or certain bees are declining, and that will have an impact on the global food supply. This is an interesting statistic that I wanted to highlight, and you may have heard that about 30% of what we eat is pollinated by bees. So this statistic comes from something that the USDA put out in the early 90s that said that honeybees in particular pollinate 30% of our food, and the majority of the pollination services are provided by other wild bees. So there's roughly 20,000 species of bee in the US, and one species of them, honeybees, does 30% of the work, but the other 60% is done by that remaining 20,000. So some examples of non-honeybees. The majority of non-honeybees are ground nesting. So these are bees that nest underground. Some of them live in colonies, but the majority of them are solitary. So that means that a singular individual queen gathers all the resources that she needs for her nest, and she nests by herself. I think there's something missing from the slide, but an important thing to note is that they can nest in aggregation. So the bees that are pictured here are Agapostemon virescens, or the green sweat bee. And these bees will nest in aggregation, which means they function similarly to like an apartment complex where all the bees use the main hallway the same way, but each maintains their own home series of cells off of the main tunnel. So it may look like a lot of bees are occupying this space, and they are, but they're not working together to care for each other's brood, or they're developing young. So as I've hinted at, bee populations are declining, and there are 4 main factors that contribute to their decline. So this is an infographic that I actually got from Suvia, a paper that she sent me. So this infographic is showing us that there are 139 native North American mason bee species, and only about 50% of them, 52% of them, are considered to have a secure amount of resources. So the other 48% are either historical, which means that they are extinct, they're critically imperiled, or vulnerable to becoming a reduced population. So we, what is driving this decline? And the first thing on the list is pathogens. So these are viruses or bacteria that are transmitting between bees that are making them sick. Just like people, bees also have viruses that make them sick. So we have to manage them accordingly. Another key factor is pesticides. The things that we are spraying on our crops, around our crops, are getting onto bees, and it does impact them. And we can mitigate this by changing when we spray, how much we spray, and what we spray. And then additionally, parasites. So these things live on or inside the bee, but they're a little bit different from pathogens in that they're just a little bit larger. There's a whole bunch of literature on why those things are different, but I'm not going to get into it. My research in particular focuses on pesticides and parasites. So parasites are feeding on the bee, and the bee may be sick, and that may be as a result of pesticide exposure, because the pesticides are reducing their fecundity, their ability to reproduce, their ability to find food, their ability to overwinter successfully, regulate temperature, find each other, communicate properly, a whole bunch of things. And then most importantly, I think, is habitat loss. So the main reason for decline is that our habitats have changed over time, and the things that bees need to survive are no longer available to them. So I think in the Palouse, about 1% of the landscape is natural prairie anymore. It's changed to about 99% agriculture. And so that change has dramatically impacted the availability of viable habitat to bees. Okay, so now we're going to talk about just one species of mason bee. This is the Osmia lignaria, or the blue orchard bee. This is the one that you guys are probably most familiar with. So this is a generalist, which means that it feeds on many different plants at a given time. If it's a specialist, that would be referring to feeding on just a singular type of plant for the course of its life, but this species does not do that. So you can plant a large variety of plants, and they will help pollinate several of them. So this bee is a solitary species. It lives alone. So a singular queen will make her nest and take care of her young by herself. They can nest in aggregation. So that means that they have close neighbors, similar to that apartment complex analogy I was using earlier. And what's really cute is that they make bee bread for their larvae or their young. So they mix pollen with some saliva from their mandibles, from their mouth parts, and they use that mixture to ferment the bread. And so that fungi, that pre-digestion actually helps the developing young, and the bacteria and the fungi that are in that bee bread are wildly important for the larvae survival and its survival as an adult. So these guys nest in tunnels that can be easily managed. They like to nest in tubes that are about, I should know this. I think it's 5/16 of an inch. I have it written down later, so don't quote me on that. Some fun facts about blue orchard mason bees is that there are 139 species native to the US. The species that we're most familiar with is also native to the US and is specifically native to Washington. They're highly efficient pollinators, so they will visit a singular flower and transfer pollen between that species when it visits, and they're able to transfer pollen very effectively between those flowers. They can visit up to 11,000 flowers every week. So they are extremely important when flowers are out, and when they are flying, they're doing a vast amount of pollination work. This is also interesting in that their darker color allows them to fly in cold weather, so that's very important. Honeybees are, we put them in all of these orchard systems, we put them out to our fields and we hope for the best, but if it's too cold, the honeybee won't fly. And so these native species that are darker in color, like these big dark bumblebees or these mason bees, they are adapted for the cold and they can provide pollination services when honeybees are not able to. And another interesting fact about them is that they can pollinate in greenhouses. So for some reason, honeybees are not able to see in greenhouses. The wavelength of the light changes too much and they aren't able to orient themselves correctly. And mason bees don't have this problem. They are able to correctly navigate within greenhouse spaces. So they're important for growing crops outside of the potential normal system. Now, it's important to note that they can only fly up to 300 meters. So they have a very tight range around their home nest. So I think Sylvia will ask a question later about this, but it's important to note that these, if you want to pollinate a certain amount of space, you do need to stock your system, your farm adequately. But I mean, I only have a home garden in the city, so one nesting block is enough for me. I know that some of you guys have several acres, so you'll want to account for that if you're at all concerned with meeting pollination needs. So what do these bees need? Like all bees, they have 3 habitat requirements. They need a place to rear their young, they need a place to secure food, and they need a place to overwinter successfully. So the nesting tubes are hollow reeds or grasses that would show up in the wild. These meet 2 of those needs. They provide a place to rear their young, and they provide a place to overwinter, since the bees overwinter in their larval state. And I'll show you their life cycle in a moment. The food component is the thing that most people think of is they need to plant all these flowers, and that's very important, but we do also need to consider that they need a place to live. So they need lots of flowering plants nearby. To translate that 300-meter distance into miles, it's less than 1/4 of a mile from where they are nesting that they can travel. And as their name indicates, they are mason bees, so they do need water and mud around. In the top picture, you'll notice that a male mason bee is emerging from a tunnel. There's a wall of mud that was acting as a protective door that he is now dismantling to get out. And you can tell that he's a male because he's got that fluffy white patch on his face and because he's the first to emerge. So in mason bees, the queens from the previous year will lay female eggs towards the back of the tunnel and male bees towards the front of the tunnel so that the males can emerge sooner and find the females as they're emerging to secure their chance at mating, and so that if a predator was to come and attack the tube, the males would get eaten first and the female bees would be safe. So we'll talk about their life cycle. Starts in early spring with the emergence of an adult bee. As I mentioned, the males will emerge first, and then they find a female to mate with. The females then work entirely by themselves. They have nesting tunnels that are 3/8 of an inch, and they will gather resources within 300 meters of their tunnel or 500 feet from their tunnel. And after that, she caps the cells using mud. So you can tell which way that the tunnel is opening, not just because there's an opening at one end, but if you'll notice on the side that the pollen isn't on, you'll see how it's a little bit bumpy. If bees, for whatever reason, when they hatch, exit the wrong direction, or they get turned around while they're developing, when they exit the wrong direction, they'll actually destroy all the bees that are behind them. So the smoothness of the mud helps them determine which direction they're facing, and they can turn around if they need to. So if it's bumpy on one side, they know that they're going the right direction, and if it's smooth, they know they're going the wrong direction. Now, you'll notice up in the top right that the males are a lot smaller than the females. So really only the males can do the turning around. If the females get turned around, it's a lot harder for them to turn. There's not really anything that we can do to prevent this. It's just kind of a fun fact about their life cycles. So I will make a note that as soon as all of your tubes are capped, you'll want to put your bee houses in the garage or somewhere safely inside to prevent them from being attacked by parasites. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but parasites are a really big deal for mason bees. Because we keep them in these large groups, parasites can develop in populations over time. I'm sure you're all familiar with the egg crisis that we're currently having. And that was also caused because we had a lot of one species in one place. And so a virus or a pathogen or parasite was allowed to develop, or was able to develop, I should say, in that system and decimated populations. So now we can talk about development. So the cells are capped by the midsummer, late summer, and the larvae will develop between May and June. They will then pupate or begin to turn into an adult by the fall. And when they're in their cocoons like this, that's the time that you want to clean them. So I'll talk about cleaning in a second. Okay, so to place your houses, when you get them, you want to make sure that they're facing an eastward direction. And that's so that the east, the sun will rise and get on the house and warm it up as quickly as possible. You want the houses to be 3 to 5 feet off the ground, and you want them to be semi-protected from predators or from the elements. You should use fresh tubes and or cleaned blocks, and I'll talk about cleaning. I won't teach you how to clean them today, unfortunately, but I do have a talk that I'll mention later or provide a little more detail for later that explains this. So after, you'll take care of these for a long time. Ideally, you'll maintain this group of bees for a long time. So after you've cleaned the cocoons on the following year, you'll want to put them near the cleaned bee tubes. And so you'll put them, nope, I didn't circle it. That little white box at the top, that's where you'll put the cocoons so that they can emerge from those little holes. The bees will exit, they'll fly, they'll find these nearby, and they'll reoccupy those wooden blocks. You do want to make sure that the daytime temperatures are 50 to 55 degrees before you put them out so that they aren't overly exposed to cold. And I think that's all I've got. So some different examples of the houses that you may see online. You may have seen these tubes up here on the top left. These you can tell are old and they haven't been taken care of for a while. Not many of them are full. There's only a few different ones that have actually been utilized. So I wouldn't say that this is a very successful house. If you're going to use paper straws, which is fine. I use paper straws as well. You'll just want to make sure that you are replacing them each year, and you'll especially need to replace them if you're cleaning and maintaining this hotel correctly. These wooden houses in the middle are rather colloquially known as parasite hotels. You can't clean them, so if they get used, these are just spaces for parasites to really develop a lot in the population, and they're not necessarily great for the bees themselves. These wooden blocks on the top right here, this is a great design. The individual slats are interlocking, so you can safely put them inside this house, and then at the end of the year, you just lift them apart to clean them out. You'll wash them with a bleach solution, and they'll be perfectly good to go for next year. I've also heard that you can bake them in the oven for a certain amount of time, but I won't be talking about that today. I do recommend that you check out the link under this picture, the catalog from the Oregon State University. They go through all the cleaning procedures and different houses and all of those things. So I do have a picture of that a little bit later. So why is cleaning important? I've mentioned it a lot, and you're probably thinking, these are just wild bees, I shouldn't have to clean them. Well, because we're managing these bees, we're changing their environments. So we're changing the way that they interact with each other and the way that other organisms interact with them. So viruses and parasites build up more quickly in a population when it's nesting in aggregation, or a lot of the same individuals of a singular species are in close proximity to one another. That's how we have pandemic outbreaks. That's how we have egg shortages. It's just a way of life when we have a lot of species functioning together, or a lot of the same species, a lot of individuals from the same species functioning together, sorry. Okay, and then the other thing is that we're protecting them. We are providing them a safe space to live. We're keeping them inside over the winter. We're making sure that they don't get rained on. We're making sure that they stay warm. So we're providing the ideal habitat for the bees, but the ideal habitat for the bees is also an ideal habitat for parasites. So if these bees were truly existing in nature and a cold snap came along, the ones that were sick maybe wouldn't survive, and that would keep parasite levels low. But we're taking away those natural selective processes. And then additionally, they are being provided with food and water inputs that maximize the amount of bees that are being produced. We're probably planting a lot of flowers for them. We're keeping running water. So these bees are getting everything that they need to survive, and that's allowing parasites to also get everything that they need to survive. Essentially, if you would clean up your own house, you would want to take care of bees too. If anybody has chickens, you got to clean your chicken coop. Anybody with pets, you got to clean up after them. You got to clean up after these bees too. So these are some things that you might find in a mason bee nest. We'll zoom in on this. So you can see in the top left, there are some dermestid beetle larvae. These are also known as skin beetles. So these guys are eating the bee larvae if they develop in this population. And a colony of this size, it's not really a colony, but a group of dermestids of this number would effectively eat all the way through that tunnel. And so they could very quickly wipe out an entire tunnel of bees. So you'll want to check them, in the winter before they are allowed to do this. You've also got an example of a mummified bee larvae on the right here. And so that happens for a few reasons, and there's not really anything to do about it. You just need to make sure that you're removing them. And then there's an example of chalk brood here. So that is when a fungi infects the larvae and it turns into this kind of chalky white, gross little thing that needs to be cleaned up. And then you'll also notice that there are some big chunks of pollen. So when a bee has, even though this one is dead, when it's pupated, there shouldn't be any pollen nearby because the bee will have eaten everything. So if you're seeing lots of pollen frass from the mites, the pollen poop, that's an indication that there are too many mites in this population, and it definitely needs to be cleaned. So this is what it looks like when the bee pupates. You get this nice, pretty cocoon. But if they have holes in it like this, that means that there are parasitic wasps that have cut through the cocoon and have laid their eggs. So you can see on the right here, there are upwards of 6 different parasites. These are the parasitic wasps that I'm talking about. So from a single bee, up to 5 or 6 parasitic wasps will emerge. And so if this was allowed to continue for years, you could see how this parasitic wasp would become a real problem in this nesting block. So this is the extension paper that I mentioned from Oregon State University. Highly recommend that you check this out. The link is down below. You can also screenshot this or whatever you need to do to find it. Highly recommend. I have a list of resources at the end of the presentation that also has this link. So a lot of these pictures came from their paper. Okay, so after you've cleaned everything, it's time to put the cocoons back in the garage. So you're going to keep the cocoons in a cardboard box in a fridge or safely around 39 degrees. And oops, that didn't go. Let's see. Okay, so after you also want to clean the blocks. So you need to clean the cocoons to make sure that the bees are safe, but you need to clean the blocks as well to make sure that there aren't any pathogens or parasites or any things developing in the wood itself. And you'll have to use new paper tubes in the spring if you so chose to use paper tubes. You want to put the cocoons in a container with 1/2-inch holes for the bees to emerge from safely, and you'll put them in a cardboard box like this above the future nesting blocks. And again, the temperature should be around 50 to 55 degrees if you're going to put these cocoons out. Okay, how am I on time? Have I gone very quickly? Oh, I went very fast. Okay, sorry. So here are some things that you can do to help. You can plant native flowers strategically so that food is available all year. So these are 3 different plants that are extremely important to wild pollinators. We've got clover, which is in the Fabaceae family or the pea family. Anything in this family is really important to native pollinators. They've got lots of pollen, lots of nectar, wildly important. And then we've got some asters down here in the bottom left. These are also equally important. Asteraceae is a very important family. And in the center here, this is Rosaceae, or an apple flower. So anything from Fabaceae, Asteraceae, or Rosaceae are extremely important. So I'm a big proponent of clover. This is like the clover covered hill that I will die on. I highly recommend that you plant clover in your lawns or wherever you've got grassy patches. It keeps your lawns green for longer because it's got these big broad leaves that help shade the ground, and they protect the ground from evaporating, all the water from getting out. So it increases water retention, and then it also increases the fertilizer or the amount of nitrogen that's in the soil, because clover naturally fixes nitrogen to the soil using a symbiotic relationship with some microbes that is well outside of my study system, so please don't ask me too much about that. And then you'll want to keep some bare earth patches for solitary bees to build nests. So, we talked about mason bees today, but there are other bees in the area that you can certainly help. And like I mentioned before, 70% of bees are ground nesting. So to help them, you should keep a little bit of bare earth, not too much, but a little bit. And then most importantly, do what we talked about today. You can put up tube housing for solitary bees to build nests and maintain them to keep healthy bees. And then I always say this, you should get involved with local organizations like the one that we are currently in, because you guys do great work. And so I love, whenever I give this talk at non-organization events, I'm always like, you guys should go volunteer. So I didn't mean for that to be so fast. There are a bunch of resources here. I highly recommend you take a look at them. There's a guide from Western Oregon about nurturing mason bees in your backyard. There's a list of pollinator-friendly plants from the Palouse Conservation District. And there's some conservation management information from naturereserve.org. And so this publication was written with the USDA and the Forest Service. So this has got some really good information in it. And then if you're interested in buying straws, there's a link to some on Amazon. There's another kind of less sciencey how-to guide for mason bee care from a couple of different sources, just in case you're really interested. So if you like this talk and you're interested in learning more about the very detailed process of cleaning, the EGSA and the Graduate Student Association at U of I are putting on a solitary bee hotel workshop April 22nd. I believe that's Earth Day. They'll be from 1 to 4 p.m. at Ensminger Pavilion, which is on campus at WSU. Parking is free, but this hotel workshop, I believe we're charging $30 a ticket this year. And that includes this lecture at about 3 times the length. So there's a lot more information in it. We've got some hands-on activities. You get a mason bee house with the tubes included, and then you get to paint and decorate the house to take home with you. If you want to encourage pollinators, you should, try and use colors that will attract them. So we encourage painting the houses because it will help stimulate them to inspect it. I also wouldn't mind if you guys have time, you also don't have to do this, but I am trying to work on my public speaking. So if you wouldn't mind taking a survey to let me know how I did, and if you learned anything or if you want to see anything in this presentation moving forward, that would be great. The link is available there. And then I'll take questions. I have so much time, so please ask all the questions you want.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I learned a couple of things, and I'm even into bees. So I guess we can open up the field for questions. I'm sure some of you have. Either write them in the chat, or if no one's speaking, just speak up and let us know. Trying to get it so I can see everybody here. Speaker. Oops.
I will say that you guys can also email me anytime, and my email is provided here on this slide. You guys are in the Pullman area, so if you want any outreach events, if you want to see any of our live arthropod collection, the Entomology Grad Student Association at WSU was happy to come out and teach adults and kids about bugs. We do have a live arthropod collection on campus with tarantulas and roaches and stick bugs and creepy crawlies that are pretty fun for kids and for adults too. So feel free to.
If no one else is speaking up, I actually have a couple things I thought were really interesting. Do you know any more about any of the work that's been done with how different bee species are looking at or seeing different spectrums, like you're talking about in the greenhouse, how the mason bees can see better than the honeybees, for example?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'll be honest in saying I haven't done much research on it. I know that they do see slightly different wavelengths, and that allows them to, hone in on different flowers. So that's really all I know about it, to be honest.
I was wondering if it was like a property of the, the glass or the plastic that's used in the greenhouse, and something about the refracted light might.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. So the greenhouse does block a little bit of the UV light that they depend on for sight. And so honeybees, they really depend on that, and they aren't able to compensate for it, but bumblebees and blue orchid mason bees are. That's why they can handle the greenhouse space.
Cool. It looks like Iris has a question.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to suggest if Mario wanted us to fill out the survey, I thought that was a nice idea. He could put the link into the chat.
Oh, sure. That's a
Yeah,
yeah,
you can paste it into the chat.
That's
Thank
a good
you.
idea, so people can click on it easier. Thanks for suggesting that.
Let's see if I can open it.
We just said we would give you several challenges while you're doing
Yeah.
the presentation.
Okay, I think that should work. Okay, and then it looks like I'm getting some direct messages. So I have a question about the term BOBs. So they're kind of, it's a friendly term, but blue orchard mason bees are sometimes called bobs in literature. And then I have another question about how do other mason bees who tunnel in the dirt deal with the cold? So I'm not too sure if there are other mason bees that nest in the ground. As I mentioned, I study bumblebees. So bumblebees are in the family Apidae and mason bees are in the family Megachilidae. So this is an entirely different group of organisms for me. But the way that insects deal with cold is that, as like a general rule, is that their hemolymph or their blood has some antifreeze properties in it. Their hemolymph, their blood is a lot more sugary than ours. And so they're able to withstand colder temperatures because it's a thicker, different consistency than ours or mammals. And that helps them survive the cold temperatures. They also overwinter usually, but not always, as their larvae or pupae form. So they're a little more aqueous, they're a little more gooey, and it's easier to recover from cold damage when your physical structures aren't quite so solid.
I was going to say, I have another question if no one else has one. Do you know if there's a particular color that they prefer for their houses?
Yeah, so they like the color blue. Bees really like the color blue. It's very reflective and it's closer, it shows more of that UV spectrum that they like.
That's interesting. Any particular blue color, like any of the blue shades, or are they dark, light colored?
I'm sure there's some information on the shade that they prefer, but I think blue is fine.
Yeah, this has been very interesting. Does anybody else have any questions about mason bees or any other kinds of bees? You do honeybees too, right?
Yeah, I love honeybees. Okay, let's see. Do the bare soil areas for ground nesters need to be undisturbed all summer? So yes, I will say that, I do a lot of work, or I have done a lot of work in like canola fields, and those spaces along the field margin where it's right along the ditch, but it's not quite in the ditch, but it's not quite next to the road. Those spaces are disturbed frequently enough that weeds don't develop, but they're disturbed infrequently enough that the bees are able to nest effectively. So those tunnels do eventually get filled in through rain and whatever else. The bees do have to dig themselves out a little bit. So as long as you're not tilling the soil, it should be good enough for them.
Any other questions? Well, I thought that was like I said, I thought that was a very interesting presentation, and it sounds like you're going to have a lot more information available for people who want to attend the seminar. Now, how many is it only going to be on mason bees, your entomology convention?
Yeah, that one, that talk. So we actually have two events that weekend. There's the, is it this next slide? No, this one. So we have on April 22nd, the Solitary Bee Hotel Workshop, but then April 23rd, the following day at the same location, we have an event that's free to the public, and we showcase our entire live arthropod collection. It's the Entomology Insect Expo, and it's so much fun. I highly recommend everybody comes. Last year, I think we had almost 400 people come throughout the day. It's like an all-day event. So much fun. I highly recommend. You get to hold cockroaches and giant stick bugs and look at our tarantulas, and there's like arts and crafts for the kids, and we partnered with Palouse Conservation District last year, and I think we're partnering with the Biology Graduate Student Association this year. So it's a lot of fun. I recommend that weekend as a bug weekend.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of fun for everybody, actually.